Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I totally forgot that DC releases comics on Tuesdays now, and it's 11 o'clock at night. I totally forgot that was the case. So we are covering DCeased Hope at World's End Part 3. Part 3. Here's the thing. All right, so Hope at World's End, this is actually super cool, right? Because we covered the first 2 chapters of this. Part 3 is awesome. This takes place between the actual issues of DC, so it's kind of filling the stuff in. But the cool thing about this too, that I hope you guys are noticing, this feels a lot like Injustice, right? It feels a lot like Injustice Gods Among Us, the way it's written, the way that it's drawn. Well, not really the way that it's drawn, but like the way the titling is and all that kind of stuff. It feels like Injustice. So what this does is this answers the question that so many people were asking, including myself. Where is Wally West? Where's Wally West in all of this? Okay, so what this does is it initially picks up in Keystone City. You basically have Wally kind of responding to everything that's going on. The fact that the anti-life virus more or less is spreading throughout the digital space. And so Wally West, of course, destroys all the digital items with a screen inside the home of himself and Linda Park. And then following that, like, it's immediately taking throughout the entirety of Keystone City, right? Like racing through the city as fast as humanly possible and destroying every screen that he can find. Now, on the surface, this does not seem impressive, but in reality, it is. Because one thing you have to keep in mind is that Wally is destroying every single screen he can find while not looking at it, which is actually a pretty insane feat in and of itself. But when you consider the nature of the Flash, it also makes sense, right? Like literally at the speed he moves, for him, it's almost kind of like regular speed, right? It's like moving like a regular person the way you or I move. And then in turn, he's just doing it astronomically fast. That kind of seems to be the case anyway, but it's one of these things, right? Because he's moving faster than thought. And that's something that you don't usually see described in terms of the speed of Wally West. But keep in mind, he's the fastest of all the speedsters. Now, for those of you guys who don't understand that, who don't really know how that works, yes, Barry Allen did create the Speed Force, but Wally West mainlines the Speed Force. And the reason why that matters is because where Barry taps into it, Wally West is in effect the Speed Force itself, right? He's like a walking, talking Speed Force. And so he's fully imbued by the power of it. So it's all, if you had to equate it to like the Green Lantern mythos, Wally West is the equivalent of like Larfleeze, right? Larfleeze is the only Orange Lantern. He has all that power. Okay, Wally West is akin to that. He's not the only speedster, but he's able to use the Speed Force in a way that allows him to run faster than everybody else. And he actually has some pretty cool feats. Running at the speed of thought is an astronomically fast pace, right? Because he's able to cover Keystone City in fractions of a second, right? Able to cover this entirety of the city within seconds of everything popping off. The funny thing about this, though, is he describes that he's almost running at the speed of light and begins to bump up against the Speed Force. Now, this is a benefit, but also a massive drawback. Wally West has been sucked into the Speed Force and has been able to escape before, but the issue with this is that time doesn't exist in the Speed Force. And so if Wally West was yanked in and then left, it could be that he came out years after all this happens, right? There's no real definitive way for him to know exactly how much time passes. And a lot of that's because the Speed Force is not fully defined in DC Comics. We don't know everything about it. We simply just know that it's there and it's how the speedsters get their power and people can be trapped in it, locked away, that kind of a thing. More often than not, depending on who's writing the story, a person can be trapped in the Speed Force, and then usually when they escape, they get out in a reasonable amount of time. So like Superboy Prime, for example, he was trapped in the Speed Force for a while, then he managed to escape through means that were never fully explained, and it was something like less than a day when it happened, right? So we just kind of, take it for how it is. But ultimately, Wally is met by the voiceover of Batman. Now, this is how we know this seems to take place before the death of Batman in the events of DCeased #1, right? So it's kind of interesting because it seems to sort of throw things off, right? This is right when the whole thing first takes off. So I wouldn't really say that the comics themselves are out of chronology, but because they're following each individual character, it kind of makes sense that it would show us what Wally's doing at the time the whole virus breaks out, right? That's really kind of how this has worked up to this point. And so with that being the case, we basically have Batman telling him, look, like, you can't let this virus take you, right? Like you can't let this virus end up taking you. If it does, you're going to be a threat to the whole world. And Wally knows this, right? For the most part, it's common sense to him because of the fact that he's a speedster. He is the actual fastest man on the face of the earth. If the virus does take him, the entire earth is going to be doomed. Now we know that plays out with Barry Allen in the main DCeased story itself, but Wally's also aware of this, and even Batman goes as far as to say, Barry, listen to me, and Wally's like, I'm going to save my city. I don't really care what it is that you have to say. And Batman, realizing there's nothing he can do to stop him, basically says, don't get scratched, don't look at a screen. Wally West is like, okay, thanks. And Batman's like, goodbye. And so that's basically the end of that. And of course, as we know, that's basically the last time that you end up seeing Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne, being infected with the anti-life virus, is able to keep himself in stasis for a while using the technology of Mr. Freeze, but ultimately it's not perfect. perfect. It doesn't really last forever. And so Wally begins to come to the realization that he himself is not fast enough to save the entirety of Keystone City, right? Because of the fact that the virus is spreading so incredibly fast, because you have so many people looking at their screens at the same time. And all it takes is a glimpse in order for a person to basically to pick up this virus. Wally can't really counter it fast enough. People are basically turning faster than he can stop them. And so because of this, Wally needs help. And so what does he do? He crashes into the apartment of Max Mercury and Bart Allen. Which I know a lot of Flash fans are definitely going to be excited about, right? The idea that Max Mercury and Bart Allen are here in this story. Bart Allen, of course, is basically playing video games, or at least getting ready to turn on and play a video game, not really paying any attention. Fortunately for him, the screen is basically facing away. Wally comes running in, destroys the laptop and the TV. Bart Allen begins to freak out. And it's kind of interesting. Around the same time, Max Mercury begins to pick up on the idea that that people are screaming out there, right? So it's all of them kind of coming to a head at the same time. Now, a little bit of explanation here. For those of you guys who were not really familiar with Max Mercury, Bart Allen, and then of course they're actually joined by Jesse Quick. Originally, these were all disconnected speedsters, right? In the sense that they didn't actually share a unified factor in the Speed Force, right? Max Mercury originally appeared in Quality Comics after Jay Garrick, and he was introduced as a character of Quicksilver, right? So Quicksilver before the version that we saw in Marvel Comics. He ended up basically kind of being a character that was shuffled off to the background and disappeared for decades, right? For decades and decades, until really Mark Waid took over the Flash mythos and then brought him back, right? And then he brought him back as Max Mercury. As far as his powers go, he actually gained his abilities from essentially a Native American shaman who basically enchanted him with the ability to tap into the Speed Force. At the time that he gained his powers, it was just a shaman that allowed him to run at super speed, right? It wasn't until Mark Waid wrote Terminal Velocity and unified all the speedsters through the invention of the Speed Force that we learned that's what he was able to do. Bart Allen, as most of you guys know, is the grandson, I believe, or the son of Barry Allen from in the future, the far-flung future. Jesse Quick's a little more interesting, right? So Jesse Quick, while not nearly as fast as the other speedsters, hails as the daughter of Johnny Quick. And Johnny Quick was basically a guy who discovered a mathematical formula that when he said it would allow him to gain super speed. Now again, because of the events of Terminal Velocity, in reality it allowed him to tap into the Speed Force. He taught the formula to his daughter Jessie, and now she's able to run at super speed, right? So that's kind of how all these different characters gain their powers, and it's how they're all sort of intertwined. But with regards to Wally, what he basically says is like, I'm going to try to keep this thing, or you guys need to keep this thing from spreading throughout the entirety of Keystone City, basically destroy all the screens you can. I'm going to look for an alternative, a way for us to basically save this place as best we can. And they race through everything, right? Like Central City, they race through New York, they race through Gotham City, they race through all these different locations. And it's pretty cool, to see that happening, because what takes place here is Max Mercury basically says the only way to really do this is to use the tandem cosmic treadmill. Now, the funny thing about this is that Wally West basically says that at some point in time, Jay and Barry had used the tandem cosmic treadmill to open a hole in space. But as far as I'm aware, the only time that the tandem cosmic treadmill has been used is when it was used by Kid Flash, Wally West, and Jay Garrick, right? The two of them used it in order to, open a rift basically. And I think it was during the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. I'm not going to swear to that, but I believe they were the only ones who were able to do that. Now I could be wrong, right? My knowledge on DC's mythos is not nearly as in-depth as Marvel's, but that's the only instance that I'm aware of. And of course they did that because of the fact that at the time, Barry Allen was the only one who could shift between dimensions, and they basically needed Barry, right? So Barry, seemed to have been dead by that point in time, and things kind of went from there. But regardless of the situation, the tandem cosmic treadmill has to be used here in order to open a portal to another dimension, right? To another world, which would allow the residents of Keystone City to basically be whisked away to safety to an alternate universe. And this is kind of interesting, right? To see the various speedsters come together and to effectively not even consider the option of getting a hold of like Superman or anybody else and basically say like, we're just going to open a hole to another dimension and then call it a day, is kind of intriguing, right? Because you would expect Wally and the other superheroes to go racing after these guys, to basically say like, we all need to kind of come together. But at this point, the idea of Wally is to save Keystone, right? And the only way to save Keystone, the 200,000 people who are there, is to open a portal and then have the speedsters whisk them there as fast as they can. And that's exactly what happens, right? This portal gets opened to another world and the evacuation of the city begins. Now, we're not really given a time frame here other than to say that, within like 12 minutes, 146,000 people have basically been saved, right? Like 12 minutes, it happens. And at least, it seems to happen. Now we can kind of break things down and say within another 2 minutes, that basically the remaining 200,000 people are saved, but essentially 200,000 people are rescued from Keystone City in the span of 15 minutes or less, roughly. That's how fast this happens. And that's why things are so cool, is because all the speedsters are coming up with these super fast solutions. And this this is the most practical one. In the span, this is one of the reasons why this is a cool concept, because in the time that it takes for the speedsters to basically open this portal and then race off and basically save people, it took the other superheroes on Earth probably that much time to rescue maybe like 4 people or 5 people or something like that. For all we know, that's how long, Superman stood talking to Jimmy Olsen in the last comic that we read. So it's cool to see how fast things happen in relation to the speedsters compared to everybody else. The problem with this is that Bart Allen can't quite handle the rigorous nature of running that astronomically fast. And so Bart Allen basically ends up collapsing. As a result of this, Max Mercury is like, okay, I'll grab Bart, you keep the door open. Of course, Bart Allen is basically thrown out there and seemingly injured in the midst of all these people infected with the anti-life virus. Max Mercury races out there, he grabs Bart Allen, and then alongside Jesse Quick, they basically end up racing back into the dimension, into this new world. And this is kind of an important thing, right? Because Max Mercury and Bart Allen always shared a kind of bond in the sense that Max Mercury was basically his tutor, right? He was the teacher of Bart Allen. And it's a cool little moment here because they basically share this bit where it's like, hey, I'm here to be your instructor, more or less, when when Max Mercury took over that role. But he's very much a father figure for Bart Allen. And so this is even more significant when of course they get to the other side, they basically, end up escaping, only for us to find out that Max Mercury has basically been scratched, right? Max Mercury is now infected with the anti-life virus. And where Bart Allen pleads and begs for somebody to do something, there's nothing they can do, right? Like the virus is coursing through his veins. There's nothing that can be done. Max Mercury's his end is imminent. And in fact, he goes as far as to tell Wally, you have to end me now, right? You have to end my life. There's nothing we can do. And then Wally basically figures out there is a way to save Max Mercury. And so what he basically ends up doing is grabbing Max and then running as fast as he possibly can, right? As fast as Wally West could possibly run, which basically opens up a portal to the Speed Force. And Max Mercury ends up running into the Speed Force, and there he remains, right? He's just running forever inside the Speed Force, trapped. He's just there. And presumably there'll be a way to rescue him if a cure is ever discovered, but it could just be one of these things where Max Mercury will forevermore be inside the Speed Force, never to return again. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. Now we'll catch you all later. Peace.